Beth Kobliner, welcome back to So Money. You've sort of been a silent co-host on this show for all the years that I've had it because truly, Beth, like you taught me so much about personal finance when I was getting started. Your book, Get a Financial Life, one of the most important books ever written about personal finance.
Thank you. That's so nice.
And don't take it from me. I mean, it's in its fifth edition now. You have a new version of this book, new updates.
Yeah. Yeah.
How does it
Was it originally yeah.
Sorry. Well, I just have so many questions, but maybe we could just start with like the feeling that you have being, you've worked through this field for decades now and all that you've seen, like what made you want to write again?
Right. Well, it was written for Gen X, my generation. And I barely made it to Gen X. I was on the cusp
Yeah.
from like baby boomer to Gen X, but I just made it by a year. And that was such a different time that, of course, we didn't know it at the time. The generation Gen X, they were slackers, we were slackers, but the economy was really good. And the outlook, which we couldn't have known at the time, was incredibly good. It was such a prosperous time. If you bought a home, the average home age to buy a first-time home back then was 28 years old. Now the average age for a first-time home buyer is 40. So that alone, I think, says it all. And talking about Gen Z and the challenges they face. And what's really interesting to me is they're quite responsible in many ways when it comes to money. So I think just knowing that, wow, times change and I've updated it every few years, but this one felt like a big, big change that from 1996 to 2026, where we are today, there is so much that young people need to know. And it's harder for them to get that unbiased information, I think. So that's one of the things that really, I think, is a big
Yeah, I
challenge.
want to talk to you about that because we both started out again 30 years ago, kind of in a
Well, you're much younger
well,
than I
a
am.
little
Come
bit,
on.
but that era was largely rooted in you trusted the people who wrote books and the
Yes,
journalists who wrote magazines, your financial advisor. It was sort of like 4
right.
places you would go to get financial advice. Now it's
Exactly.
so,
Social media, is it TikTok? Is it Instagram, YouTube, or your like uncle who gives you advice, or it's so pieced
right.
together. Whereas, back in the day, not to sound old, but magazines like Money Magazine, Smart Money Magazine, they were truly independent. And all we did as journalists was try to figure out what's the best thing to recommend. And, it's the model is completely different now. And you're getting information often. Some of it's good on social media for sure. Some of it's really good. But you always have to sort of keep in mind, what am I being sold? How is this person being compensated? And that could get, I think, tricky.
Is it AI? Is it even real, what I'm seeing? I mean, really.
Totally.
The title of your
Right.
book, Get a Financial Life, I love it. I have to ask though, if you could rename the book, right? Can someone in their 20s today really get a financial life in their 20s? You know what I mean?
I know. I know. It almost seems too glib. My mom came up with that idea years ago, but I think you can still get a financial life. I mean, the truth is you have to. You have to do what you can in small ways. And I think sometimes people like roll their eyes, but here's an example. Back 20 years ago, 30 years ago, we'd say, okay, if you don't buy a coffee in the morning and you put that money into a 401k, how much would you'd have $300,000 if you did that. And then there was a period of time in between, like the last 15 years, where people were like, oh, that's ridiculous. Drink your coffee. That advice is dumb. Oh, we have to live for today. And when times are flush, you can sort of say, yeah, I can buy a coffee. But today, when I've been talking to young people, and I've actually been talking to high school students, and I'll give this coffee example, and they don't roll their eyes. They're like, oh, that's really smart. I never thought of that.
Yeah,
So it's kind of like things come full circle.
right.
And I think in many ways, this generation will have to proceed a little bit maybe closer to their grandparents' generation, in the sense of like, yeah, the small amounts of money that I save really do matter. And if I take money and save 10%, any paycheck I get that comes in, no matter what, I take 10%, put it into savings, and then everything else is what I can spend, after paying taxes and rent. And if I can't afford rent, I move back home if possible for a couple of years. It's definitely harder. There's no question. But it almost to me feels like this is the time where it's even more important for people to work on getting their financial life in order. And I think the other big thing we see is like there's so many promises being dangled in front of young people that are enticing. Cryptocurrency, buy now, pay later, all these things which are catching so much attention and a lot of business from young people in particular that won't help them in most cases get their finances in order.
It's such an important point. I mean, we talk about this attention economy that did not exist, right? When we were first writing about money in magazines and writing books, largely because the internet wasn't where it is today. We didn't have social media. And that's
Right,
a real obstacle because part of what makes people have the ability to manage their money well is focus. And to your point
right.
earlier, like knowing who to trust. So, where do you recommend people go to find the right information, the trusted information, especially if you feel like your parents or your grandparents, even though you're saying maybe we got to kind of take a page out of their playbook, we don't really want to listen to them.
I know. I know. It's hard. It's funny. My whole life, when I've done this and I've given book talks, people are like, yeah, my dad, he's an accountant. He told me that, but now I'm going to listen because you said it. Sometimes it's easier to hear advice from you. Certainly, people have learned so much from you, hopefully from me. And I feel like my other big takeaway point is this does not have to be someone's entire life in the sense of scouring the different stock markets and looking into every kind of cryptocurrency out there. I think it does boil down to the basics.
Mhm.
And even though, again, people often say, yeah, but what's the real trick? The answer is there's really no trick. And we can use technology, though, to do simple things like my paycheck goes into my savings account, direct deposit, and then I take 10% and it goes right into or it goes into my checking account. I put it into my savings account. Now, fortunately, many employers, when you start work, you're automatically signed up in the 401k. And it's really important to check if you are or not. And young people are participating in 401ks at a much higher rate than certainly my generation. You're very generous. I could say our generation, but certainly my generation, they're participating much better now.
Mhm.
They're also putting a little more money into the stock market. But sometimes I get concerned where in the stock market are they chasing hot stocks or are they putting it into an index fund?
Right.
Which, my gosh, historically, I look like a genius because, 30 years ago, I said, put your money in index funds. And that has done most actively managed funds. And so those kind of tried and
Mhm.
true, arguably boring pieces of advice can really do stand up now. They've stood the test of time and they will continue to stand the test of time going forward. And just knowing those and not sweating all the other stuff.
Yeah. Well, new to this edition is many things, many things. One, you wanted to really concentrate on student loan repayment options. This wasn't really as big of a debacle or really a debacle in the
Debacle.
90s, and it kind of has surfaced now as superseding even credit card debt in our country. And so I would say one of the other things that's really happened over the last 10 years in terms of personal finance advice is like we've started to recognize these systemic problems where for so
Yes.
long it was like you do these things and you'll be fine.
Right.
It's on you.
Right.
And then you did
Right.
all those things and yet there was still, how do you fight against a system that's been bankrupting young people through student loans,
Yeah.
right?
It's really kind of amazing. And you said that perfectly because I think that, you were told if you go to college, don't even worry, go to any college. You could take out the loans, just do the best you can. Oh, you want to major in like poetry? Okay, go to college. And,
Right.
and then people are coming out with, hundreds of thousands of dollars in student loans. And what really boggles my mind now is the computer science majors who are coming out and seeing like, oh, AI computer science degree really isn't what it used to be and maybe replaceable. It's a that to me is very, very difficult for young people. And I think maybe it's kind of a callback to basics. And maybe once again, I don't know if depression era mentality, there's got to be a new word for it, but the idea of let's like think
Self.
through, yeah. Yeah. I mean, right now, people or graduate, a typical college student who has any loans at all has $20,000 in student debt. So how do you pay that back? What are the programs out there? And there's so much. And in, the book, I've made sure to update it to sort of figure out for young people, maybe they've been taking a few years off from paying because they were in a certain kind of program. I mean, it's just mind boggling to me. Or those kids who did the programs which allow you to work in public service loan forgiveness. And then that became a nightmare because they weren't getting credit, even though they thought they were getting credit. So hopefully now, I mean, the new system will be probably less generous in the sense that you'll probably have to pay more in interest in total, but it's simpler. And I think simplicity now is going to be important in making those choices of just looking at, studentaid.gov, seeing how much you owe, figuring out, how do I pick a reasonable payment plan and getting into that, getting that automatically taken care of. But you're right. I think it has been unfair. And that's why as students and as I talk to high school students, no, pay attention to that debt.
Yeah.
If you can go to the local community college for 2 years or a local college for 4 years and not have to pay for room and board, that's a huge savings and could really help you, for the rest of your life. And it's just a total mind shift.
Yeah, we have I guess, the real results now of people saying, "Hey, I did the thing. I went to college. I got student loan debt. And now it's not working out for me." And I think that the Wizard of Oz curtain has been sort of lifted. And now these teenagers who would have otherwise been sold that false bill of goods again are seeing the truth and up
They're seeing
close.
the truth.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But we should also mention that people who do go to college earn 60% more than those who don't go to college. So the advice is not don't go to
Right.
college because there's a big premium for going to college, but go to an affordable
Right.
college, one that won't put you, the sort of rule of thumb used to be, don't have more debt than what your salary will be on your first job. So, but I would say even keep it less than that. If you're going to earn $30,000 on that first job, then maybe try to keep your debt under the median, which is now $20,000. And if you could get away with even less than that, great, because it's entering life. And as we're seeing, that's one of the big reasons milestones are being delayed. People are getting married later and have children later and buy a home later because many are weighed down with student loans and grad student loans.
Mm. What gives you optimism right now, Beth? For me, I sort of see this transference of wealth. Not everyone's going to benefit from that, but eventually these boomers whom you wrote for, Gen X / boomers who probably first read your book, are now like on their way to retirement. Those inheritances might trickle down to the Gen Z and millennials, et cetera. But the question is like, will they manage it responsibly? But even that is a little bit of a silver lining. Like some of that wealth transfer should help out those who are saddled with debt, can't buy a home, can't start a business, et cetera. Does that give you hope? And then what else might give you some optimism right
Right,
now?
right. I mean, that's a great point. And now, I mean, we see changes in that fact that young people who buy homes, the vast majority of them get help from their parents. The rules used to say you couldn't even get help for the down payment from your parents because, the banks wanted to make sure you could pay it back yourself. That's all changed and they allow you to get help. So in that sense, it's good. And if you have parents who can help you, that's great. But think and the other problem, I mean, it's good. We love our parents but they're living longer.
Yes.
And so I've had more young people come over to me and said, I'm worried about my parents. And these aren't young people who have tons of money, but they're like, I barely am making enough to get by and start paying my own rent, but I'm worried about my parents' financial future because a lot of times those parents borrow to send their kids to college. So it's complicated. But you asked me about optimism, and I'm going to give you optimism. I think Gen Z, this generation of people in their 20s and 30s, they save more. They save 3 times more than the rate than my generation did in the 1990s. They're much more likely to open 401ks, whether it's because their companies open it for them. But even before those rules kicked in, they were contributing to 401ks. So they know that they have to be a bit more grown up than maybe slackers did. my generation. They're going to college, a high percentage are going to college. I do think, we don't have the evidence yet, but I do think they're going to be much more mindful, just like this generation is much more mindful of not taking on too much credit card debt. Although, unfortunately, in the last year, since the pandemic, basically, young people have taken on more credit card debt than they had been for the last 15 years. But when it comes to learning from the past, they're not going to take on, I hope, as much in terms of student debt because, like you said, they've heard the horror stories of their older siblings or even their parents. And the other thing that makes me really happy is they have health insurance. Whereas my generation, when you were in your 20s, not that many people had health insurance. Now, 85% of people in their 20s and 30s have health insurance. And that's, of course, thanks to the, Affordable Care Act and the fact that young people can be covered either whether it's by their parents or they're mindful of the fact they need to get it, that this is something that does so that. And the reason health insurance, of course, is so important is you avoid that major financial disaster.
Right.
A child gets hurt, and then they're not only do they get hurt or they're sick, but their parents could potentially go into bankruptcy, which we know was the cause of the vast majority of bankruptcies and, in the last few decades is not being able to pay for medical expenses. So that makes me happy. I also think this generation is pretty savvy. They know that influencers are trying to influence them, not always, but often because they're getting paid for certain
Right.
products. That doesn't necessarily prevent them from doing what the influencers tell her. So I think this mindfulness over time, I hope there'll be more and more awareness on the fact that, wait a second, does it really make sense for me to put the little bit of savings I have into some cryptocurrency that some, guy or girl is telling me about, on TikTok? I'm not sure if that makes sense. And if this advice was really so great, would they be sharing it with me? Would they be announcing it? Wouldn't they just be buying it up themselves?
Great point.
So I think that education and that common sense, again, maybe what I think of my grandparents or parents' generation where they're kind of you have to just be really savvier and a few steps ahead of, the other big one. Well, this is not an optimism, but these buy now, pay later deals, which are crazy, right? I
I
mean,
mean, basically, yeah, and it's contributed to a lot of overspending,
yes,
debt, and then it's unclear how it impacts your credit. It's just kind of a
yes,
wild west. They're getting more
yes,
regulated, but not I don't think fast enough and enough. And so it's just, I'm always a little skeptical of financial products that are created by MBA students. You know what I mean?
right.
Like I'm like, is
Yeah,
this
it's a good
really
rule of thumb.
yeah, I mean, who's really winning here? You brought up medical expenses and I started to think about the first person who ever read your book, right? Let's say she was like 25 years old back in like the early 2000s, 2000, late 90s. Now maybe she's getting ready to retire. She is retired. Something we could not have predicted perhaps then was how high her out-of-pocket medical expenses might be. You mentioned people are living longer, Medicare is not fully sufficient. People are finding themselves paying out of pocket if they have to like get a nursing care facility, any sort of like, you know, extra, which is a lot of people. And so how does a near retiree get a financial life given all of these sort of modern obstacles that we don't have solutions for yet? I mean, it's too late at that point to try to get maybe a long-term care policy or start saving aggressively for it.
Right, right. It's very tough. I mean, if you're in the workplace taking advantage of, it's small savings, but flexible spending accounts that you could put money in that's not taxed for you. So at least then you get some tax break from it. But it's really hard. And the answer is really, unfortunately, it's hard, but it's saving more and taking advantage of, catch-up contributions to retirement funds. Like at age 50, once you're, at age 50, you can contribute an additional $8,000 on top of the normal 24,500 into a 401k or 403b. The super catch up at age 60 to 63 can actually increases the limit that you can catch up with to 11,250. That's hard. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's just, saving more, putting it away for the future is really, I think, the best step that someone can do, and just knowing those rules and knowing you could do that. And while keeping money in the stock market is obviously very important for long-term growth, as you're nearing retirement, just paying a little more attention to the fact you don't want it to be 80,
Right.
90%, I think, in the stock market, because we don't know what we're up against in the next couple of years. And we want to make sure that in an emergency, you have something to fall back on.
Right. Great. Yeah. I mean, delaying your retirement.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Also, I find people don't really want to just stop working, right? That
I
traditional
know.
definition of retiring is not that appealing as it turns out. Like, I actually do want to be out there still creating, thinking, doing.
Right. Well, like I said, I mean, I am at a certain age where, I'm meeting other people and peers who are saying, I'm going to retire. And then so far, and this is definitely a certain segment, because if you're working in a job that's physically grueling and demanding, I get it. Like, it's very difficult. And those people sometimes switch into some other way of doing their work. If they're a nurse, maybe doing private nursing or something that you could switch what you do and don't do it as rigorously. But I know of a lot of people who quit their jobs
Mhm.
and then about 4 months later said, I do not like this. I love my grandchild, but I can't play 24 hours a day with the grandchild. So there is definitely more of a sense of, and now we know even working keeps your mind more active and you're engaged more with people. And so for good or for bad, I think, a lot of people are realizing they have to work much longer, and then even they want to work much longer. But it's tough. I think, the other, of course, the obvious of, if you have high rate credit card debt, get rid of that. Paying
Oh,
off a
yeah.
credit card that's charging you 22%, which is basically near historic highs. And that's the average now. Paying that off is the equivalent of earning 22% on your money guaranteed after taxes. That's an important one. Just get rid of that as best as you can. And diversification, like I said, and making sure your money is appropriate for your age. And if you do need to get at it, that you can, and you're not subject to like a real downward slope of the market. Because, of course, that could happen, and that could happen for a while. And, long term, historically, it's been a great investment. I mean, unbelievable. But you want to make sure if you're going to need that, you can get at it.
You've worked a lot in the education system trying to promote literacy at schools. And I want to have a couple questions about that, but kind of related is just if you could snap your fingers, what is a policy change that you would love to see that would directly support Americans' abilities to get a financial life easier than it is, and not because we wanna just make it easy, but because we wanna make it equitable and right.
Right. I think that's a great question. I mean, since I've been doing this for 30 years, there's always this concern, is Social Security there? Will it be there? And I remember there was a poll done 30 years ago. It said young people believe in UFOs more than they believe in Social Security being there for them. It was like a great catchy headline. And I think a lot of people are still really scared. People who aren't on Social Security now, but like in their 40s and 50s, like, ooh, will it be there for me? And by all accounts, we can never say never in the environment we're in, but I think by all accounts, there is a huge constituency of people who will ensure that Social Security will be there. And it's gone through funding periods, but it is something that, if there was some way to shore up the public's appreciation of the fact that it is still, they talk about the three stools, and on a stool there are three pedestals. What are they called?
3 legs to a stool.
Three legs. I couldn't think of the word legs. Thank you. See, you are much younger than I am. Legs. There are three legs to a stool, and one is your savings, and one is your retirement, and one is your pension. And I mean, your Social Security. And having that knowing Social Security is there, having the government just say, you know what, we're going to commit to this. We're going to make sure it's shored up, and we're going to prove to people that it is. And I think that would go a long way
Mhm.
toward at least alleviating some of the terror that people have. Social Security is the thing that has kept the vast majority of Americans out of bankruptcy for decades. And I think, there's so much like, we don't want government, we want private. Well, I don't know if cryptocurrency or any of these things are going to be there with any FDIC insurance to it. And that's another one I talk a lot about for young people. And there are a lot of neobanks now.
Mhm.
And you have Venmo. So a lot of kids just have Venmo or Cash App, and you keep your money in your Cash App. And well, those aren't FDIC. They're not paying you insurance for the most part, for the most basic Venmo account. Certainly they don't. And they're not FDIC insured. And just explaining to young people, I mean, I found talking to a group of high schoolers in New York City about this, they're like, oh, wait, you mean this, if I have money in the bank and if I one day have $250,000 and the bank fails, I get it back? I'm like, yep. Within a couple of days, historically, that's been the case.
Yeah.
And just the appreciation of knowing that there are some smart things that have been put in place in the last, century, and shoring them up and making sure they're there. I think that skepticism that a lot of young people, like I've met a lot of young people like, I don't trust a bank. Yes, bank fees are obnoxious, but here's a way to shop around and get a bank with a really high interest rate, and it's online only, but you don't care. You're young. You're used to
Yeah.
that. And sort of explaining how FDIC insurance is really important and really means something. I think it's a lot of it's education too. And sort of there's no one, there's no one on TikTok going like FDIC insurance, get it, make sure that it's
There's
sort of
nothing
like
there's no shop now button after you tell
yeah,
that give that spiel. But
exactly.
now I'm curious, like, what else should we be telling high schoolers, right? Like that they will
Right.
I think we underestimate a young person's ability to really understand and appreciate financial advice. And
Right.
I have an 11-year-old and he's starting to understand investing and gets it. And I kind of meet him where he's at. For those high schoolers, I think such an important time. First of all, do you think that literacy programs can actually work in a school setting? I'm a little skeptical. I don't remember anything I learned in high school.
So this has been the most fun I've ever had in my career. And other than going on Sesame Street with Elmo,
Yeah.
but this was the second most fun thing was I wrote a curriculum called Get a Financial Life NYC for high school students. And it's going to be in 50 public New York City high schools in the fall. Right now it's in 30 high schools. And I've been visiting these high schools. Like I visited 20 high schools. I just went to actually my high school, Cardoza High School in Queens this morning. It was amazing. But it's a curriculum that here are the 10 things you need to know as a high school student. And it's over 10 days and it teaches them, debt, credit, budgeting, saving 10%, and all the things that they really need to know now. Index funds is a whole section, and how you can invest in an index fund with just starting with as little as $1, and how to find a very low cost one, and why index funds over individual stocks, and why gambling is not really an investment because polls show young people think it is. I believe so strongly, and there have been polls and research beginning to show that there is an advantage of teaching young people in high school personal finance junior year, senior year. Ideally, you could even start in 9th grade. But I think the trick is doing it. I sat in a class of high school seniors this morning, and Mr. Leris's class, and I sat there and watched these high school seniors. They were jazzed.
Wow.
They were taking notes. They wanted to know, okay, I want to be in a bank that protects me. This kid's like, what happens when I have $250,000 and $1? Will they protect that $1? It's like, nope, you got to open several accounts in several different kinds of accounts in a bank. The education that's really practical and meaningful, I think kids are embracing. And we're talking about a range of kids. I'm going to all different schools in all different socioeconomic areas. So I think it's incumbent. I mean, New York State just passed last month the sort of 40 plus things that kids need to now be taught in starting in 5th grade, going through high school. So New York State is really late to the game, but finally they passed something requiring that personal finance be taught in high schools and in middle schools, and soon it'll be elementary schools. And I absolutely think, I think back to once on my book tour, a young person said to me, you know what? my high school social studies teacher said to me, "You're not going to remember calculus. You're not going to remember trigonometry. You may not even remember Shakespeare, but you will remember this. Put at the time $2,000 into an IRA every year." And she said, "You know what? I did it
Yeah.
because I just made a mental note. And if we can tell young people to do those things, that's
Can you
hugely
imagine?
important."
I just, got knowledge on the Trump accounts and, call them what they call them what you want. But, like, in essence, it's, like, basically setting up your kid for retirement at a young age. I
It's
I see them
amazing.
as more as retirement savings vehicles and not much else, but
Yes.
still, like,
Yes.
you can convert the Trump account well, it automatically becomes a traditional IRA, but you could also convert that to a Roth IRA at an age when they're not really even making any money, so the tax bill is not gonna it's like 0, theoretically.
Exactly.
Perfect time to transfer that into a Roth IRA, and now they have a Roth IRA with potentially, like, 6 figures in it if you've been investing since they were born.
It's incredible. I have to say, it is definitely a positive advance, and I'm hoping that employers are starting to offer it to their employees and people. It's definitely a positive thing. So I think all those kind of things are really meaningful, even if you're more to the point, even with IRAs, if your kid works, you can fund his or her IRA as long as they make enough income to match that amount, also helping them for the future. So all those, it really is the kind of thing that I think it's incumbent upon parents now. Not only are we thinking about our retirements, which I would argue you should think about first and foremost, but if you have the ability to put money away for your kids into an IRA, into these Trump accounts, that is a very smart thing to start doing as soon as you can.
Beth Kobliner, thank you as always. Get a financial life in your 20s and 30s. So appreciate you. Thank you for, you know,
Thank you.
not giving up on us and coming back with more information and really, invested in your readers us all these
Can I
years.
say something? You have always been so generous and smart
Thank you.
and wise and excellent with your advice and the way, just everything. So
Oh my
I
gosh.
really want to tell you that. I think your listeners are really, really learning so much from you. And I've always admired that.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I'm gonna update my website with that quote. Thank you very much. LinkedIn
My
updating as
pleasure.
we speak. Yes, thank you so much. Good luck on your book tour.
Thank you. Great to see you. Thanks.